the Commission concluded that Israel has committed genocide against the Palestinian people in Gaza, and that it is continuing with that genocide.
That's a UN commission announcing that it has found the Israeli government has committed genocide against Palestinian people living in Gaza, claims the Israeli government described as a libelous rant. What has actually happened today, and what will it mean for the international response to the conflict in Gaza? We'll discuss in this episode of the BBC's daily news podcast, Newscast. Hello, it's Adam in the Newscast studio, and we will catch up with Chris and Alex to find out about goings-on at Westminster. But first of all, we're going to talk about this report that was published on Tuesday morning by a United Nations commission, which found that Israel had been committing acts of genocide against Palestinians living in Gaza. So this isn't the United Nations as a whole. This is a commission which was appointed by a particular body within the UN to look at the situation. And they looked at the things that we've all seen on the news happening in Gaza. They also looked at statements made by senior Israeli politicians, including the Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, and they listened to testimony of people in Gaza. And this commission concluded that if you put all that together, that meant that 4 out of the 5 categories of genocidal acts were actually being perpetrated by Israel in Gaza right now. Now, the Israeli Foreign Ministry responded to this pretty quickly. They rejected it categorically and denounced it as distorted and false. And they said that the 3 commissioners were acting more like proxies for Hamas. So, what does this mean, and how will this play into the whole international picture around the conflict in Gaza? Let's discuss it now with the BBC's International Affairs editor, John Simpson, who's here. Hi, John.
Hi, how are you?
I'm good, thanks. I see you got your notebook out.
Yes.
There's quite a lot of stuff to go through here.
It's complicated.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose the first thing is, like, you see headlines saying the UN has declared that it's genocide, but actually it's not the United Nations as a whole. It's a particular body that's been appointed by some of the UN.
You're absolutely right. The UN itself, if there is such a thing, is really quite wary of this. For all the reasons that you might imagine, not just because it doesn't really yet quite want to get into the whole business of Israel and Gaza and so on, not kind of full time, even though they've issued all sorts of warnings and so on. But it is a very complex issue, and they're nervous about doing that. But also because they know that so many member countries, particularly in the West, are, I'm trying to get the right word, it's not really unhappy, but they're just wary of a process that they think is too open, too uncontrolled, accusing one country of genocide, and that they just think, we've got to kind of be careful. So with all of that going on, the UN itself doesn't want it, but I mean the Commission of Inquiry does say absolutely without any question that it is genocide. Genocide it matches 4 out of the 5 definitions of genocide which were established in 1948 under the convention.
And so broadly speaking, genocide is the deliberate attempt to destroy a group of people based on their race or religion or where they live. And this 1948 convention spells out kind of 5 ways in which a genocide can be perpetrated. And this commission finds that 4 of them appear to be happening in Gaza.
Yes. I mean, the irony, of course, is that in 1948, the genocide that everybody was thinking about was a genocide against the Jews. There's a real irony that 80 years later it should be directed at the state of Israel.
So the 4 categories are killing members of a group, causing them serious bodily and mental harm, deliberately inflicting conditions calculated to destroy the group, and preventing births. What are some of the bits of evidence that the Commission cited to make their case?
Well, I mean, they weren't allowed to go there. I think they made their judgments entirely on the testimony of people who'd suffered and the video of it happening. I mean, there's an another irony here that Israel says you haven't provided enough evidence that's credible, and at the same time, of course, they're preventing people like you and me, external journalists and observers, from going there to. That's not really an irony, I suppose. It's but what it is that there's a clash there between what Israel is demanding and what it's prepared to offer.
And in terms of the evidence that's cited, it's things like statements made by the then Defence Minister, Yoav Gallant, saying,
we're fighting human animals.
Yes, or statements made by the President or the Prime Minister that they were going to destroy Gaza City.
Yeah.
Because the Commission say that's a sort of disproportionate thing to say.
In particular, Gallant's words about human animals, that they're quite clear that is the kind of precursor to genocide, and has happened in other genocides. I mean, it happened in Rwanda, where I think that exact phrase, human animals, was used.
Why don't we hear from Israel's ambassador to the United Nations, who is Daniel Marin?
Israel categorically rejects the libelous rant published today by this Commission of Inquiry. It spreads the malicious genocide narrative. The report diverges from the mandate of the Commission, yet again stressing their biased analysis. Since its inception, the modus operandi of the Commission was clear. Facts are malleable, sources are selective, and divisive terminology is employed to exacerbate and polarize the conflict.
Clearly, Israel has to close this down if it's to continue governing and continue fighting its war.
And also, Israel's accused the three members of the Commission of being Hamas proxies, which they've very strongly denied on the airwaves today. And when we're talking about the Commission, the commissioners are, so it's a human rights judge from South Africa, a human rights lawyer,
Navi Pillay,
and a human rights expert from Australia, and an expert from India as well.
Yes. I mean, that is a fairly standard thing that Israel likes to do, to try to reduce the credibility of people that criticize it by saying they're making Hamas's arguments for them. And it may not have very much effect outside Israel, but inside Israel, that is quite a strong argument. And you have to remember that, I suppose, like any other government, really, Israel is mostly concerned with its own public opinion. And by saying that kind of thing, they feel they're able really to kind of pull the plug on any kind of credibility.
And I suppose what can actually happen as a result of this finding? Because this commission, they don't actually have any powers, do they? They can't actually do anything with this.
No, they can't. The one thing that they could do, and that they'll be hoping to do, is to get the International Court of Justice at The Hague to pick it up and then to indict Benjamin Netanyahu and various ministers.
And also because that court case at the ICJ, I mean, that's already in process, isn't it? And everyone says it will take years. That was the case brought by South Africa.
That's right. I mean, but this does strengthen that, even though one of the three people on the commission inquiry is South African and was involved to some extent in the background, at any rate, of the South African decision. But I mean, anybody who thinks that anything like that will happen in the short term is totally mistaken. And Israel, like the United States and like Russia and like all sorts of other countries, doesn't accept the jurisdiction of the International Court of Justice anyway. So, we are way off anything like that.
The next thing that's going to happen, though, is the UN General Assembly quite soon, where a whole host of countries, including the UK and France, are going to recognise a Palestinian state. I mean, we say that phrase all the time now. What's your interpretation of what that actually will mean?
Well, if I'm frank, pretty minimal, because apart from anything else, there is no clear territory that Palestinians occupy. It's been invaded constantly by settlers, cut down in all sorts of ways. I mean, what about Gaza now? It's so much of it has been steamrolled and destroyed and blown up and bombed that, I mean, it's a wasteland, really is an utter wasteland. And the West Bank is kind of honeycombed with areas that have been taken over by Israeli settlers. So, A, no territory, B, who would be in charge of it, who would be the Palestinian government. I mean, not very many people would be happy with the present Palestinian government, which is mired in corruption, is utterly weak, which Hamas itself is totally opposed to. So, if you say, yes, we recognize Palestine, well, what are you recognizing? You're not recognizing a real full territory, and you're not really recognizing any form of government. But it's a statement, and it's a frankly rather easy statement to make. They don't need to do anything else.
Yeah, it's a much easier thing to say than to actually then manage the consequences afterwards. And also, one of the reasons Starmer said it was to pressure the Israeli government into allowing more humanitarian aid into Gaza. And it doesn't seem that that's happened. So as a pressurizing technique, it doesn't seem to have worked, which many people said at the time it wasn't going to. Yeah. And just on thinking back to your long career covering conflicts, that word genocide, I mean, what are some things from your experience that can help us kind of think about what it is as a concept?
Well, I mean, I watched it happen in 1994 in Rwanda. That there was absolutely no question that I think every one of the 5 tests for true genocide was met in Rwanda. One ethnic group attacking another and destroying individuals, taking away children, creating appalling bloodshed, which I witnessed. So I do know what genocide looks like. I just think, I mean, from the journalistic point of view, but, people often get onto me on Twitter and other things to say, why aren't you calling it genocide? It's a clear genocide. And that argument will be stronger now that the UN Commission has said it. But it seems to me, and this is only my own interpretation of it, I don't think the BBC has gone into this, but it's a little bit like calling Hamas terrorists. By using the word genocide, by using the word terrorist, you show what your view is of the situation, whose side you're on. And that's something that the BBC doesn't do. I mean, I've been personally rather criticised from the president of Israel down for saying that the BBC doesn't call Hamas terrorists any more than we used to call the IRA terrorists.
And it's not that we don't use the words, because we've just been using the word genocide for the last 15 minutes. It's just that we attribute it to the people who are using it.
Yeah, exactly that.
And also we should say this commission that we're talking about today, they've opined previously, and they've said that both the Israeli army and Hamas have been guilty of war crimes. So they've looked at it from a sort of different angle, not just the genocide angle. They've looked at kind of war crimes as well.
Yes, precisely.
John, thank you very much.
Thank you.
And now let's cross to Westminster and speak to Chris Mason. Hello, Chris.
Hi.
And Alex Forsyth. Hello, Alex.
Hello.
We should say, actually, there's a bit of this is going to sound weird, end-of-term mood in Westminster today, isn't there, Alex? Bizarrely.
Well, a kind of end-of-term mood, because, once again, Parliament is just about to rise for a recess for the party conference season. So yeah, there's a kind of, I think maybe within number 10 there might be a kind of end of term slightly relief that all the MPs aren't going to be kicking around Westminster together, but I think it's pretty safe to say that doesn't mean the politics is going to stop.
No, but it does mean the one thing that would otherwise have happened tomorrow, and I had to remind myself of this today, is that there's no Prime Minister's questions.
Yeah.
So you have a Wednesday lunchtime, the last two have been pretty bumpy for the Prime Minister, particularly last week, and then suddenly, it's kind of not there. And the next conference, of course, we've had a few already. We've had Reform, haven't we? We've had the Trades Union Congress. The next one is the Liberal Democrats starting at the weekend. So kind of it is an otherwise normal week in politics. So it's not normal because it's a state visit, but politics is going to carry on. It's just that the green benches won't be occupied.
And talking of things that did happen on the green benches, Chris and I previewed it extensively yesterday, the SO24, Standing Order 24
of course.
Emergency debate.
This is the Newscast SO24 special, Alex.
Yes.
You're very welcome.
I feel really honoured to be
The
here.
follow-up to the special. Alex, this was this emergency debate prompted by David Davis, well-known Conservative backbencher, into the hiring and then the firing of Lord Mandelson as the ambassador to Washington. What did you make of the 3 hours of back and forth? Although there wasn't actually much forth.
No, there wasn't much forth, was it? It was kind of quite one way, if we're being perfectly honest about it. I mean, it was pretty obvious. So a couple of things I'd take away from it. So it was this 3-hour debate, and it was, I mean, your big thing was that everybody was lining up to try and pose the questions they think still need to be answered about what was known by who and when regarding Peter Mandelson's appointment, relationship with Epstein, and then subsequent sacking. I mean, that's the kind of like short summary, if you like, of it. But a couple of things did strike me about it. I think notably one of them was that Emily Thornberry was perhaps the most vocal critic from the Labour benches, or at least high up in them. She's obviously the chair of the Foreign Affairs Committee, and she stood up saying that she wants her committee to be looking into this, saying that she thought there were red flags that were missed in the whole process
Or ignored
of Mandelson's appointment. So she was highly critical from the Labour benches, and then you had a lot of criticism from the opposition. But I think what was notable about that, and it might not come as a surprise, but it's probably worth stating, is how much they were just really trying to keep this focused from the opposition benches on Keir Starmer and on Keir Starmer's judgment. So you heard it from Kemi Badenoch, but you also heard it from Ed Davey, and you heard it from a lot of other critics who were trying to say this was about the Prime Minister's decision-making and judgment throughout this process.
And for those critics, Adam, this is the kind of perfect case study or the perfect storm of the Prime Minister and decision-making, because this was a discretionary appointment. He didn't have to send a political appointee, someone who is Labour royalty, as one of the Conservatives described Peter Mandelson. And then, of course, Peter Mandelson came with a CV where he left jobs earlier than he intended to, courtesy of his friendships often with very rich people. So all of that was kind of re-litigated. It was a kind of monsoon of questions, really. And then you had Stephen Doughty, who's the Foreign Office Minister, who was the guy who publicly sacked Lord Mandelson, effectively, in terms of delivering that statement last week, saying that, what was the language along the lines of the Prime Minister has instructed the Foreign Secretary to withdraw the ambassador from Washington, which is a very diplomatic way of saying you've been sacked. And there he was trying his best on a sticky wicket when he is neither the Foreign Secretary nor the Prime Minister, as various Conservative MPs pointed out, to try and do the best of trying to defend how the government acted, when privately there is an acknowledgement that it was a mess and that how the process worked and why various things didn't get to the Prime Minister quickly enough, particularly around that fulsome defence of or fulsome statement of support for Lord Mandelson at Prime Minister's Questions last week, when the Whitehall machine was aware of some of the details of what was about to emerge publicly. There's quite the sort of gnashing of teeth and post-mortem about that.
And in terms of what we learned, Alex, actually that happened this morning, and it was Emily Thornberry, chair of the Foreign Affairs Select Committee, publishing a letter that she'd received from Yvette Cooper, the Foreign Secretary, responding to some questions that the committee had asked the Foreign Office about the whole hiring and vetting process.
Yeah.
Fill us in, Adam.
Was this to do with the Cabinet Office role? Is that what you're referring to? Actually, this was largely the Cabinet Office that were leading on this.
I'm going to let newscasters into a secret here, which is that, and if you're watching on YouTube, you probably may even have seen it, which was that as Adam was posing that very thoughtful question, Alex and I were looking at each other as if to say, I hope you know. No, I don't either.
Well, why don't I fill you in?
Fill us in.
Fill us in.
So basically, what it turns out was that the Foreign Office basically kind of washed their hands of the appointment. They were saying, it's up to Downing Street to
Yes.
hire the ambassador. The vetting is done by the Cabinet Office, a unit in the Cabinet Office. And actually they said, or Yvette Cooper's letter said, that the Prime Minister had announced the appointment of Lord Mandelson as the ambassador. And then the vetting and stuff happened after that. And of course, the vetting is protected by lots of data protection law. So ministers, the Prime Minister, actually don't see any contents that's been dug up by the vetting process. They basically just get like a thumbs up or a thumbs down to the person. That's all they get.
Yeah, in other words, and I've heard this expressed privately by various folk, you get this sort of fog of bureaucracy that is, as some would see it, sort of necessarily complex and necessarily discreet and involving agencies that are acting on behalf of one bit of government whilst working for another. Then you have elements that are done after a public appointment. Now, that might be tricky in any appointment, but it's particularly tricky when it's a public appointment of somebody of such high profile. In other words, it's going to be quite hard to reverse out of it in the way that it might not be around a career diplomat being withdrawn from an ambassador's position in a far smaller country, for instance. It would be noticed, but wouldn't make headline news. All of this as part of this attempt to dissect, basically how on earth this managed to happen. Both the questions around appointment and then the questions around their handling of the revelations in the last couple of weeks.
Another thing that always happens on a Tuesday is the regular meeting of the cabinet, and we always get that readout afterwards, which is usually quite a generic thing about, everyone agreed it would be good if there was economic growth. But occasionally there's some little gems in there that reveal some thinking or are a message that Number 10 wants to get out there. And today's one was basically kind of responding to that big march at the weekend, which had been organised by Tommy Robinson, also known as Stephen Yaxley Lennon. And the line from the Prime Minister that he told the Cabinet was, "We are in the fight of our times between patriotic national renewal and decline and toxic division." Chris, what's your take on that line from the Cabinet readout?
What we're hearing here in that, and we heard an element of it in the Prime Minister's interview with Gary Gibbon on Channel 4 News on Monday, is the framing that we will get, I think, in the address that we'll get from the Prime Minister in a fortnight's time in Liverpool at the Labour conference. They've been chewing this over in Downing Street for the last couple of months. That idea that, as they see it, they are the custodians of what they would see as the pragmatic centre of British politics. These phrases are never perfect, but that's the essence of it. And circumstances thrown up that they are the ones, if you like, holding the government vase at the time when an insurgency of Reform UK are offering to radically different solutions to how we are governed, are polling very well and are, as things stand at the moment, a serious prospect to be the next government. And I think what we'll get from the Prime Minister, and you get a sense of that from that readout, is him trying to make an argument that says we have to make a case for, if you like, they won't use these phrases, but like the establishment parties, the way it's been done before, because as imperfect as it might be, it's better than the alternative. So he's trying to sharpen the critique of reform, sharpen the dividing line between Labour and Reform, portray the other parties as effectively irrelevant to the battle that is to come, and to argue that he is the one best placed to take on Nigel Farage. And you hear phrases like describing people as plastic patriots and suggesting that Labour's mission is the more patriotic. So interesting that he leans into that kind of language all the time in framing this argument. But we'll get a whole lot more of that, and underneath it will be a subtext that says, even if you don't like this government, even if you're never inclined to like Labour, if you're horrified by the prospect of Nigel Farage, Labour is the only vehicle there to defeat him. That'll be the kind of thrust of the message that I think you'll get, because he will portray the Conservatives as increasingly irrelevant, and he can point to the defections, of which there was another today, Maria Caulfield, the former health minister, from Conservatives to Reform, as he'll portray the Conservatives as increasingly irrelevant. And in an argument that he won't need to be explicit about, as we know from the last election, in areas geographically where the Liberal Democrats are strong, Labour tends to be weak. So in that sense, you have a sort of informal arrangement there. It's not even an arrangement. You just have an informal quirk of the political geography of the UK that is arguably sort of mutually beneficial. So that'll be the argument that, as I say, I've known for months that that's what they've been pondering, and I think that'll be the thrust of what we get from the Prime Minister in a couple of weeks.
What is quite interesting about that is how he is leaning into the language of patriotism when we know one of the big challenges for Keir Starmer is managing in his party the two different perspectives. One that says you need to take the fight to Reform UK and the other one that says stop being led by Reform UK. And it's just going to be a fascinating way to see how the Prime Minister finds a path through that, treading, as he would see it, so that he can embrace his version of patriotism, which is a little bit of what we heard of what he said to his cabinet this morning, without ostracising or alienating those on the Labour benches who feel like there has been too much focus on the response to reform as opposed to sort of following what they would see as traditional
completely.
Labour
And there's that bigger thing, which is who wins the battle for authentic, being authentically patriotic. And obviously that's in the ear and the eye of newscasters to conclude. But so interesting that the Prime Minister is deciding that he knows that Nigel Farage is trying to occupy that territory and he wants to walk onto it himself. That's sort of, if you like, and you see that in the arguments around flags and all the rest of it. But then how does the Labour movement collectively, particularly in the context of the deputy leadership race, go on? How does it itself wrestle with that concept when there are some on the left who've always been quite squeamish around overt badges of patriotism around flags, others much less so, and will happily embrace them. But that's an interesting dynamic too.
Although if you go back to this cabinet readout, the today's offer for patriotic national renewal from the government is the civil nuclear partnership that's signed between the UK and the US this week about developing nuclear power in various parts of the UK. That's the offer in response to the march of more than 100,000 people calling for immigration to be slashed at the weekend. Some people might think that's quite an anemic offer to quite a full-throated demand.
Yeah, and I think that the danger that the government faces at the moment is a conclusion over and over again that various things that are served up as examples of what they're trying to do amount to something that is insignificant as far as a critic would see it. Underneath that, though, and this is the other message they're going to hammer this autumn, and this is not new, but I think in its emphasis we'll hear it a lot, is the dash for growth, because I think they recognise that alongside being seen to credibly deal with illegal immigration, again, massive challenge, no guarantee of success. If they can start turning the corner on either or both of those two things, and it's a massive if, and it might prove very tricky to do either, let alone one, never mind both. But if they can start making impressions on either or both of those, some of those the political landscape could start to change. It could start to feel quite different.
In the most simple terms, it's the argument that goes to counter the critics who say that we aren't very good and things are broken, is get stuff fixed. Right?
Yeah,
and
completely.
I think the challenge
and
of that,
if people feel a bit better off, if the mood shifts from one of a sense of decline or a sense that things don't work or a sense that the waiting lists are long, etc., if over time they can begin to just shift that, often quite hard to measure, although it pops up in various metrics, but the collective sense of how we feel as a country, that is almost certain to then play out in some way or another in the relative prospects of the different political parties. So I think that's kind of what that's getting at, even though, Adam, that example seems outwardly like quite an odd example to illustrate the point that was previously made.
Alex, I was going to say, is there a real sense of a pomp and ceremony at Westminster because the president is about to arrive for a state visit, but actually it's not happening at Westminster.
No, none of it's really happening at Westminster. No, so day one, Windsor. Day 2, PM's country retreat. So none of it's really happening in Westminster. So no, I think not here. But there's definitely a sense of anticipation about it because I think everybody knows quite rightly that the stakes are pretty high. I mean, there's potentials here for Keir Starmer to do what he wants to do, which is to move on from what's been the incredibly difficult domestic agenda of the last week or 2 weeks or however long you want to say it's been, and into an area where traditionally he's been thought of to be more comfortable, which is his foreign affairs approach and the relationship that he's cultivated with Donald Trump. But it is risky. I mean, there's stuff that might go well for this pair, but with that unpredictable president, there are some really difficult areas and some points of real difference between them on policy as much as anything else. So I think there's no pomp or ceremony, but there is an enormous amount of anticipation about what the next 48 hours are going to bring.
Yeah, because there's the jeopardy, as Alex says, because of the unpredictability of President Trump. There's there's the sort of baked-in appreciation grounded in his family tree, his mum being born in the Outer Hebrides, and his commercial connections here, those golf trips that he did back in July in Aberdeenshire and Ayrshire. And then there is, and we've said it before, but I think it's worth saying, this improbable relationship that the two men, the President and the Prime Minister, have managed to build up, which has sustained up until now over the last 12 months of their face-to-face contact. They first met face-to-face at Trump Tower in New York this time last year. But then there's those dividing, those areas, not necessarily of outright disagreement, but of different instincts. You think of the Middle East, you think of Ukraine, and then all of those swirling questions about Jeffrey Epstein. So you throw all of those into the mix. And then news tonight, as we record it just after almost 7 o'clock on Tuesday night, that the attempt to get rid of tariffs on UK steel being sold to America, the discussions around all of that have been paused indefinitely. So it's not, it's not all straightforward. Of course, these things never are. International negotiations always have bumps or lines that one side will draw that they won't go beyond at a particular time, etc., etc. But I mean, certainly from hearing from folk in government, they think that, of course, discussions around tech deals and all the rest of it happen anyway all the time. But if you put something like this in the diary, there is pressure exerted on the systems of both administrations to get to the point where you can say stuff around the banquet and the horse and carriage and the fly past and the pomp, if you like, of the days that we're going to get, principally tomorrow for the pomp and then principally Thursday for the politics.
It's Thursday the press conference day.
Yeah.
Is that we're going to hear from the pair of them?
Yes. So tomorrow will be very much the pictures for the American audience, and of course we'll see them as well, but the President, the First Lady, the King, the Queen, the Duke and Duchess of...
No, the Prince and Princess of Wales.
And Princess of Wales, sorry.
Get your protocol hat on, Chris.
Sorry.
Some reading up to do tonight.
Deary me. I was about to say Kate and Wills, and I thought, no, I've got to rise better than that. I've got to, and I got
a very
all,
Trumpian, an informal Trumpian way of it.
No, exactly. I got all muddled up. And then Thursday, is the politics at Chequers, the PM's place in Buckinghamshire, and the Foreign Secretary is going to meet Marco Rubio, her opposite number, and so there's quite a lot of face-to-face government chat, and that FaceTime obviously matters.
And our FaceTime, the three of us, is about to come to an end because we're at the end of this episode of Newscast. But before we go, Chris, as a geographer, and Alex, as a colleague of two geographers,
there's a quiz coming on here.
Oh no!
Newscast census news.
Oh yeah. Oh yes.
Thousands and thousands of people have done it.
Is that right?
I was thinking there'd be like maybe a couple of hundred. So I'm quite surprised.
Honestly, thousands and
it's
thousands.
into multi-four figures.
Wow.
So that's good.
2001.
I'm not going to put an exact number, and also because it's still going. It's ongoing.
It's just my journalistic instinct when you hear of a person of authority, Adam, which I'm bestowing that title on you briefly.
Yeah, it's when government ministers
making
say
a claim, a numerically based claim, which is a bit vague.
It's when government ministers say this will be done in a matter of weeks, and you're like, okay, so 8 weeks or less, because then it would be months.
No, but at least a matter of weeks uses a time frame that is used by the rest of us in normal life.
Not imminently. That's the one that always bugs me.
In due course.
In due course is my favourite.
What's
meaning.
the definition of either of those two things?
Yeah, I mean, imminent is
point.
elastic, isn't it, at Westminster? But at least it
Imminent's definitely
implies
elastic. I'd say
something
days or weeks.
soonish. But in due course means absolutely nothing.
At some point in the future, perhaps.
Yes.
Well, the census will close in the coming days, and then we will analyse the results in due course. And then we will respond subtly to the themes from the census by tweaking how we do Newscast.
You've
but
been
not
spending too
telling
much
anyone
time
what we've
around
done.
politicians.
Well, you then get the thing, don't you, where where a government or an opposition will talk about doing something by a season. And so they'll say, by the spring. And then you think, I'm not sure June is the spring.
Spring can be very long.
Yeah.
Autumn statement, 26th November.
Yes.
Oh, and it's 100 days till Christmas.
Today?
Santa's first 100
No, it's
days.
not.
Is that right?
Yes.
Today is 100 days
It's
till
the most
Christmas.
depressing thing I've heard all day.
What, because it's a long way off or too close? You misery.
Bah humbug.
Good job. Thousands of people have done the census before Alex was like, slammed Christmas. Right, Alex, see you soon.
See you.
Chris, see you soon too.
I'm going to go and read my royal, who's who.
Burke's Peerage. And that's all for this episode of Newscast. We'll be back with another one very soon. Bye-bye.